He was 16 years old. He weighed 130 pounds, stood 5 feet 8, and on the afternoon of October 3, 1980, he left his after-school job at a filling station on the south end of Millard, North Dakota, and was never seen alive again. That is not a story about a teenager who ran away from home. That is not a story about an accident that nobody witnessed. That is a story about a man who drove a station wagon with a cracked taillight, who knew the boy's shift schedule, and who had been circling the edges of that family's life for months before he made his move. And it would take 35 years, one storage unit in a climate-controlled facility outside of Bismarck, and a property manager who very nearly threw out a padlocked footlocker without opening it to finally give Raymond Dubeck the justice he had been owed since the autumn of 1980. But before we get to any of that, we have to go back to Millard, North Dakota, in the last summer of Raymond's life. Because to understand what was taken, you first have to understand who Raymond Dubeck was. Millard, North Dakota, in 1980 was the kind of place that measured itself in grain elevators and church steeples, and the distance between them. It sat on the flat eastern shelf of the state, population under 3,000, surrounded on all sides by the kind of land that goes on so long and so level that the sky above it looks twice as large as anywhere else. Winters came early and stayed without apology. Summers were brief and brilliant. The town ran on agriculture, on the co-op, on the feed store, on the high school football team, and on the CB radio chatter that connected the farms on the county roads surrounding the township in the days before anyone had a reason to need anything faster. Raymond Dubeck had grown up the youngest of 3 children in a household that ran on discipline and affection in roughly equal measure. His father, Frank Dubeck, was a crop farmer who leased land 2 miles outside of town. His mother, Helen, worked part-time at the county assessor's office and baked, by all accounts, the best kolache in 3 counties, a skill she had inherited from her own grandmother and passed on to Raymond, who was, at 16, already the only one of the 3 children who had learned the recipe. He was a junior at Millard High School, enrolled in shop class and biology, earning B's and the occasional C, playing backup point guard for the Millard Bison in a year when the team was quietly expected to have a strong run at the regional title. He had recently started saving money. He had told his mother in September that he wanted to buy a used pickup truck by spring, something reliable enough to drive to Fargo for college. He was, by every account from teachers, teammates, and neighbors, exactly the kind of steady, unhurried, quietly optimistic kid that small towns are built around. His after-school job at Hensley's filling station on Route 8 was new that fall. He had been working there for 6 weeks when he disappeared. He pumped gas, checked oil, swept the lot. His shift ran 3 to 6 on weekdays. The owner, Walt Hensley, would later describe Raymond as the most reliable young employee he'd had in 20 years of running the station. On the afternoon of October 3rd, Walt closed the station at 6 as usual. Raymond's bicycle was still in the lot. Raymond was not. Walt assumed he had gotten a ride home with someone and thought nothing of it until Helen Dubeck called the station at 7:30 looking for her son. That was the last time anything about Raymond's disappearance would seem simple. At 7:45 on the evening of October 3rd, 1980, Helen Dubeck called the Millard Police Department. The dispatcher, following the standard protocol of the era, told her that a missing persons report could not be formally filed until 48 hours had elapsed. Helen Dubeck said something the dispatcher would later describe as very firm, and asked to speak to the duty officer. By 8:30, a Millard patrol officer had driven out to Hensley's filling station. Raymond's bicycle was there. It was leaning against the east wall of the building, exactly where he always left it, exactly as it had been at 6 o'clock. No sign of a struggle in the lot, no personal items. His work jacket, which he typically wore over his school clothes on cold evenings, was gone. His school bag was not. School bag still there. Work jacket gone. He had intended to leave. By 10 o'clock, Frank Dubeck had driven every road between the filling station and the farm twice. He found nothing. He drove them again at midnight. The Stark County Sheriff's Office assumed jurisdiction on October 5th. The lead investigator assigned was a 45-year-old named Harold Briggs, a former Army MP who had spent 16 years in law enforcement and who drove a county-issued Chevy Blazer with a cracked windshield he kept meaning to replace. Briggs interviewed the filling station owner, Raymond's teachers, his teammates, and his older brother Dennis over the first week. No conflict at school. No debt. No girl trouble. No reason visible from the outside for a 16-year-old to vanish without his bicycle and without calling home. One name surfaced on the fourth day. A man named Curtis Fenn, 41 years old, worked as a livestock hauler operating out of a small acreage property 5 miles south of Millard on County Road 11. Several people, 2 neighbors, the feed store owner, and one of Raymond's teammates who had briefly worked a summer job at the Fenn property, independently noted that Fenn had shown an unusual interest in Raymond over the preceding months. He had stopped at the filling station 4 times in the 6 weeks Raymond had worked there, each time coming at the end of Raymond's shift. He had driven slowly past the high school on at least 2 occasions documented by a parent volunteer in the school pickup line. He drove a 1977 Ford Country Squire station wagon. It had a cracked driver's side taillight. Briggs interviewed Fenn on October 8, 1980. Fenn was cooperative, unhurried, and careful. He said he had stopped at Hensley's because it was the closest station to the county road he used regularly. He said he had not seen Raymond on October 3rd. He said he had been home that evening. He had no alibi witness. He had no evidence against him. He had a record, 1 conviction for theft of property in 1971, and a dismissed assault charge in 1974. That suggested a man who operated near the edge of acceptable behavior without fully crossing it. Briggs asked to search the property. Fenn declined. Without a warrant, without a body, without physical evidence, there was no probable cause to compel a search. The district attorney reviewed Briggs's notes. He agreed there was nothing actionable. Fenn was interviewed twice more in the following months, and each time his story held because it contained almost nothing. No details that could be disproven. No timeline that could be contradicted. Raymond was not found. The case remained open. The file got thicker, and then, by the mid-1980s, it stopped getting thicker. Frank Dubeck never fully recovered. He was 53 years old when Raymond disappeared, and 68 when he died in 1995. And in those 15 years he had become, by degrees, a man whose grief had calcified around the absence of answers. He still farmed. He still sat at the same kitchen table. But Helen told her older daughter, Marlene, in 1987, that she thought Frank had stopped truly sleeping sometime in early 1981, that he still got up at 2 or 3 in the morning and sat in the kitchen in the dark, and that she had stopped asking him what he was thinking about because she already knew. Curtis Fenn moved away from Millard in 1983. He sold the County Road 11 property and relocated to the Bismarck area, where he operated a 1-truck hauling business under a variety of LLCs that he registered and dissolved at irregular intervals. He paid his taxes. He kept a low profile. He had no further criminal record. He was, from the outside, a man who had settled into an ordinary middle age, and the town of Millard, which had watched him with suspicion for 3 years, eventually stopped watching. By 1990, 10 years had passed. Raymond Dubeck's name was still in the Stark County Sheriff's open case files. It had been assigned to 2 additional detectives over the decade, each of whom had reviewed the file, found nothing new to work with, and moved it back to the shelf. The high school's 1981 yearbook had a blank space where Raymond's junior photo should have been, replaced by a small photograph of his bicycle and a line of type that read, "In memory of Raymond Dubeck, class of 1982, who is not forgotten." The yearbook advisor had made that decision herself. Nobody had asked her to. Nobody objected. Helen Dubeck had made it her personal mission to keep Raymond's name in the county consciousness. She called the sheriff's office every October. She submitted a letter to the Millard Courier every year on the anniversary of the disappearance. She had learned, over the years, to write those letters in a way that was factual and restrained, because she had learned early that people responded better to dignity than to grief, and that what she was doing was not asking for sympathy, it was asking for attention, and attention had to be maintained over the long years when it wanted to drift away to other things. By 2000, 20 years had passed. Helen was 70. Frank was gone. Dennis had moved to Fargo, started a family, and called his mother every Sunday. Raymond's older sister Marlene still lived in Millard, still drove past Hensley's filling station, which had changed owners twice and was now a convenience store with a different name, and still found, every October, that the anniversary hit her the same way it always had. Like a door closing. Harold Briggs had retired from the Stark County Sheriff's Office in 1997. He was 62. He had taken a box of case materials home with him, not officially, and he knew it, but nobody had stopped him. The box lived in his basement. He reviewed it most years. He wrote an unsolicited memo to the Stark County Cold Case Liaison in 2002, 2006, and 2009, each time noting that Curtis Fenn had never been adequately cleared, and that, in his professional view, the County Road 11 property and Fenn's current whereabouts merited renewed attention. The 2009 memo was acknowledged. None of them produced action. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, digging through records and piecing together lives that deserved better. If you want us to keep uncovering stories like this one, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. Drop us a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Your support is what makes this work possible. Now, let's get back to Raymond. The case had been cold for 34 years when a property manager in Burleigh County opened a storage unit that a man named Curtis Fenn had stopped paying rent on. On a Tuesday morning in March 2015, a property manager named Donna Veach was working through the inventory of delinquent units at a climate-controlled storage facility on the western edge of Bismarck. Curtis Fenn had rented a 12 by 20 unit at the facility since 2001 and had, without prior communication, stopped paying in November 2014. After the standard delinquency process, certified letter, 30-day notice, final notice, the unit was legally abandoned under North Dakota statute, and Donna was authorized to document and dispose of its contents. She photographed the unit. Most of it was ordinary: furniture, boxes of tools, hunting equipment, old appliances. In the far corner, partially obscured by a stack of cardboard, was a military surplus footlocker, olive green, padlocked. The padlock was a cheap one, and Donna cut it with bolt cutters. She opened the lid. She looked inside. She called the Bismarck Police Department. Inside the footlocker, investigators found a work jacket. blue nylon, a filling station name tag with the name Raymond still legible on the front, a pair of work gloves, a North Dakota school ID card with a photograph, a teenage boy, photographed against a blue backdrop, looking directly into the camera with the mild self-consciousness of someone who doesn't yet know that photographs can outlast the person in them. Raymond Dubeck. His jacket, his ID, in a padlocked footlocker in a storage unit in Curtis Fenn's name, where it had been sitting since, at minimum, 2001, and, based on the jacket's condition and the fading of the ink on the name tag, likely much longer. The Bismarck police contacted the Stark County Sheriff's Office that same afternoon. The Stark County Cold Case Liaison, a detective named Paul Oster, pulled the Harlan file, looked at the name Curtis Fenn, and found Harold Briggs's 3 unanswered memos sitting in a folder dated 2002, 2006, and 2009. He called Briggs at home. Briggs was 80 years old and answered on the first ring. "Tell me you found something," Briggs said. "Forensic DNA analysis is now routine in cold case work." Investigators swabbed the interior of the footlocker and recovered biological material, a single strand of hair and a partial print from the inside of the lid that matched Curtis Fenn's profile in the North Dakota criminal database, where it had been entered following a 2004 fraud conviction. Fenn's DNA was in the system. It had been there for 11 years. Nobody had had anything to put it next to. Now they did. Curtis Fenn was 75 years old. He was living in a rented house in South Bismarck. He had been living there for 3 years. A Burleigh County warrant was issued on March 19, 2015. 2 Bismarck detectives and a Stark County deputy drove to the address at 7 in the morning. Fenn was in his kitchen. He had the television on. He looked at the badge one detective held up. He looked at the warrant. He said, "I wondered when somebody'd find that locker." He was handcuffed and walked to the car without further statement. A neighbor watching from a driveway described the scene as unnervingly quiet. There was no shouting, no resistance, just an old man in a housecoat being led across his own yard in the March cold, looking less like someone being arrested and more like someone who had been waiting a long time to stop carrying something. Curtis Fenn was charged with murder in the first degree. The footlocker contents were entered into evidence. DNA from the interior matched Fenn with a probability the state crime lab reported as greater than 1 in a quadrillion. The name tag with Raymond's name. The school ID with Raymond's face. A plastic bag inside the footlocker containing soil consistent, by forensic analysis, with the composition of Stark County farmland. Raymond's remains were never recovered. Fenn refused to provide their location before, during, and after his trial. That refusal, deliberate, sustained, final, was its own form of cruelty, and the Dubeck family knew it and lived with it regardless. At trial in October 2016, the prosecution presented 36 years of circumstantial and physical evidence. Fenn's presence at the filling station in the weeks before the disappearance, his refusal to allow a search of his property in 1980, his relocation to Bismarck in 1983, the same year, records showed that he had rented a storage unit for the first time at a different facility, which he had vacated in 2001 and been unable to account for the contents of. The footlocker, the jacket, the name tag, the DNA, the school ID with the face of a boy who had never come home from a $6 an hour job pumping gas. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Curtis Fenn was convicted of murder in the first degree on October 22, 2016. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was 76 years old. He showed no visible reaction when the verdict was read. He looked, one reporter wrote, like a man who had already made his peace with his own arithmetic. Helen Dubeck was 95 years old in 2016 and had been living in an assisted care facility in Fargo for 2 years. She had been told, carefully and by her daughter Marlene, about the arrest in March 2015. She had been told about the jacket, about the name tag, about the boy in the ID photograph, looking at the camera the way he always had, unhurried and mild and present. Marlene Dubeck-Karch told a reporter from the Bismarck Tribune that her mother had sat quietly for a long time after she heard the news, and then she had said, "He kept Raymond's name." She meant the name tag. She said it not as a condemnation, but as something she was still turning over in her mind, trying to understand what it meant that the man who had taken her son had kept, for 35 years, the object that most identified him as a person. She did not attend the trial. She was too frail. But she was told the verdict on the evening of October 22, 2016, and she said she was glad. Then she asked Marlene to make sure Raymond's October letter went into the Millard Courier that year. The same as always, the same as every year since 1981. He should still be in the paper, she said. He was here. Helen Dubeck died in February 2017, 4 months after the verdict. She had spent 36 years writing letters and making phone calls and keeping her son's name in the air of a town that might otherwise have let it settle. Whether that constitutes justice is a question that probably doesn't have a clean answer. It is something, which is not the same as enough, but which is also not nothing. Harold Briggs died in 2019 at the age of 84. His daughter confirmed that he had been present in the courthouse on the day of the verdict, that his son had driven him 3 hours from his home in Minot to sit in the gallery, and that he had not said much on the drive back, except that he wished he had been louder about Fenn in 1980 and every year after. His basement box, containing 3 decades of unsolicited memos and a copy of the original 1980 case file, was donated to the North Dakota State Historical Society. In the best photograph of Raymond Dubeck, the one his family gave to investigators, the one that appeared in coverage of the 2015 arrest and the 2016 trial, he is standing in front of the family farmhouse on a bright autumn afternoon, squinting into the sun, wearing a Millard Bison basketball hoodie with the hood down and his hands in his pockets. He looks like someone between 2 things, the way 16 always looks, between a life that is ending and one that is about to begin. He looks like a boy who was about to buy a truck and drive to Fargo and become whatever came next. He was. The Curtis Fenn case contributed to a formal review of North Dakota's cold case protocols in 2017, resulting in a policy change requiring all physical evidence from open homicide and missing persons cases to be cataloged against state and federal DINA databases on a rolling 3-year review schedule. The policy is now named, informally, after the case that prompted it. The investigators who worked the case refer to it simply as the Dubeck Review. There is something that sits uncomfortably at the center of this case, and it is worth naming directly. The truth was in a padlocked box for 35 years, and the box was nearly thrown away. Donna Veach cut that padlock because it was her job to document the unit's contents, not because she had any reason to suspect what was inside. If she had simply disposed of the footlocker without opening it, a decision that would have been completely within her legal authority, the truth might have gone with it. The evidence that convicted Curtis Fenn was one bolt cutter from being discarded with the rest of his ordinary possessions. That is not a comfortable fact, but it is the fact, and it belongs in the telling of this story, because the lesson of Raymond Dubeck is not just that truth endures, it is that truth endures only when someone is paying attention at the exact right moment. We'd like to know what you think. Curtis Fenn refused to the end to reveal where Raymond's remains are. Does a life sentence feel like sufficient justice when a family never gets to bring their son home? What struck you most about this case? The storage unit, the name tag, or the 36 years Harold Briggs spent writing letters nobody answered? And what does it say about justice that the break in this case came not from any investigator or new technology, but from a property manager doing routine paperwork on a Tuesday morning? Justice found Raymond Dubec after 35 years. Stories like his are why this channel exists. If you believe truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe. More cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.